Hi, welcome to Jeremy's Tech Channel, and today we're going to talk about why the Linux desktop is lagging behind the Linux server space. Last night I was going through my regular research and reading and getting prepped for today, and I came across this tweet. This tweet was from Nixcraft. He's someone I'm following on Twitter. I think he's a great follow if you're interested in Linux. But he highlighted someone else's tweet. It sparked some thoughts. Just want to share what was discussed really quick, and then we'll just kind of have some discussion here between us. Okay? Nixcraft says, Linux desktop in a nutshell, and he mentions this tweet from @growing_Daniel. Says, I always thought it was a Minix replacement, or he thought he could do a better job, and he wasn't thinking about a Linux desktop. I don't know, but Linus mentioned the closet dream of Linux desktop is Chrome OS. He uses Fedora, by the way. And here's a tweet that was mentioned that started the discussion that I came into. I'll always enjoy the fact that Linus Torvalds created Linux because he wanted a desktop OS that he liked, and it has become the default computing platform for literally everything except desktop. You know, I can kind of see where he's coming from, right? It's not like everyone who uses Linux is jumping on board to use the desktop side of things. I mean, when you look at where Linux is, yesterday I was talking about my 60-day challenge, and there are a lot of devices that are used in the audio world. There are amazing devices that use Linux as their controlling operating system for their hardware. You'll see Linux running most of the web servers, and in random things, probably like your gas. If you go to the gas station and you've got a computer pump that's got a screen and all of that, there's a high probability that a lot of those are using Linux to run those. There's just a lot of places where Linux is done well. And for some reason, there is a viewpoint of Linux as a desktop where it is not going well, or there's too many quirks, or, you know, a mass adoption. Why isn't it a mass adopted, right? And I will say, my first go of Linux 15 years ago, I didn't feel like it was ready yet. Too much tweaking and messing with for me to do my daily work. So I decided to move to Mac OS to make my life easy, and almost, you know, too easy in one sense, because when you have hardware and software integrated intentionally and specifically, those kinds of operating system issues are minimal. It doesn't mean they didn't happen, but they are minimal. So I was thinking, why does it have this perception? Because I see so much progress in the sense that I'm able to work and not feel like I'm missing out. I really don't feel that way anymore. You know, I have a couple other devices with some family members using them as well, and they've got Linux on them, and it's working well for them. They're none the wiser. So why is this the case? And I think it's, you know, a couple of main reasons. One that I think I need to highlight, and I think it's the most challenging thing that people are going to, at least I'm having a hard time resolving in my mind, is that the thing that makes the Linux desktop and Linux in general the most, its biggest strength, is also what I believe potentially its greatest weakness. It is so fragmented, and you can look at it two different ways. You can look at it as multiple people developing something for individuals and small group uses that makes it a very powerful thing. Many people are developing it for their own use case, and that's really what Linus Torvalds did in the first place. He wanted to develop something that would work for him. And then being a part of an open source community and opening it up through the GNU public license, now he had other people taking it and seeing it, and it grew from where he even considered it being. But the same thing that makes the Linux operating system so strong is also from a desktop, a Linux desktop perspective, what's making it so weak. Imagine if everyone, all the distributions, all of the individual uses down to using Linux from scratch, right? If all of it was focused on a singular desktop environment, developing it for the largest group of people. Now, I understand there's some philosophical reasons why we don't want to do that, but I'm just talking as far as what would strengthen the desktop as a whole, as far as mass adoption. The development of things that we tend to work through, some of those quirks, some of those things that we have to do on the back end to make it to work for us, probably would be minimized, right? Because there'd be so many people focused on a singular desktop environment, a singular package management system, a singular collection of software packages. And I think that would really strengthen it as far as a desktop. Now, there's also a major downside to that, and that's why we don't do it. The fact that things are getting developed for very specific groups of people is what makes it strong as well. If we didn't have people that were developing other open source software like OBS or Inkscape or Blender, who knows where we would be? And I know that wasn't necessarily Linux specific, but I believe a lot of people who program and develop things in the Linux space are typically doing it because they have a need that needs to be met, right? You know, if you had the power of the KDE team with the power of the GNOME team and the power of the XFCE team and the Linux Foundation and everyone who works on and develops the Linux kernel and the Debian team and all of these things, and they all were working together, what would the Linux desktop look like? Now, you could argue that they technically are working together, right? The code is out there for you to take a look at and to share and to work on and to grow with. And so there are things where forks end up working out to the benefit of all, or someone takes the code and makes it even better. That is amazing. When you look at it from a different way and you look at it as being fragmented, it starts to potentially be the reason why the desktop is not really where it could be. Now, once again, I don't want to sell one thing and lose, gain one thing and lose something else that makes it so great. So I don't necessarily think that's necessarily the answer, but I do think it's a part of the challenge that is what we're working through. The second piece of this is pre-installed on hardware. Now, on this thread that I was reading, someone said that they tried to do that in Brazil in the early 2000s, and it failed miserably. People were trying to get Windows on those devices, and his reasoning was they were poorly supported, poorly developed Linux distributions. It was in the early 2000s. That was his rebuttal to someone else who answered that. But I really do believe hardware that has Linux pre-installed is going to make things the best option. I've read and heard and listened to other people talk about one of the developers with Fedora talking about what would grow Linux adoption. He talks about, the freedom of choice and having it your way, not having it, for you and what's for you, not just what a corporation. This is my understanding of what he said. This is not exactly what he said. This is just my understanding of what he said, what I took from it. And I think that's true, highlighting, a customized operating system, highlighting a customized is really going to be something that people are going to gravitate towards. They're not going to gravitate towards, I use Windows, I use Mac, I use Chrome, I use Linux. They really don't. Most of us use Linux. We do. We do gravitate towards that. People who use Mac OS typically are like, I have an Apple product. They're in the Apple ecosystem. People who game, they typically build the PC and put Windows on it so that they can play the newest games. That's just what they do. And people at work, they want a well-supported operating system and hardware ecosystem. The way Windows works, they essentially make building computers cheaper for large manufacturers. That makes it where most of them will put Windows on those devices. It makes sense from a business perspective. But I believe hardware-specific things and maybe choosing a niche or a group, kind of like SteamOS and the Steam Deck, I think that's a niche that is a great platform for Linux to be highlighted, specifically the Linux desktop space. I personally think it works outstanding. I understand the polished side of things, the finesse, if you will, that Mac OS has. It's pretty great as far as that goes. I understand that. But the customization and the ability to work well and quickly, Linux Desktop has it. I don't know if there will ever be the year of the Linux Desktop. I don't know who started that. I think that's definitely a misnomer. I do think there is so much room for so many more people to use Linux and enjoy it, but they just don't really know. I guess the term we use is normies, that people who aren't really interested in what we're normally interested in as far as the operating system, they're probably not going to install an operating system on their device, but they probably will buy one with whatever's on there. Is it a good price? Does it have what I want and what I need? Now, the last little piece of that is, does it have AAA gaming titles? Does it have major software like Adobe and Microsoft Office? I'm just talking about from a general perspective, not a specific perspective. I don't care if I have Microsoft Office or not, but I know some people do. I don't care if I have the Adobe suite. We got away from that at work, but a lot of people do care. It's important enough that that might keep someone from purchasing that desktop or laptop that has Linux on it. But that didn't stop them from purchasing Chrome OS. Chrome OS, they're like, that's cool, I'll get Chrome OS. And how did Chrome OS become so popular so quickly? Google specifically focused on education and focused on classrooms. And it grew. What does the Linux desktop need to focus on? What do you think? Should we as a community as a whole just keep it for ourselves and enjoy it the way we have it? That's a valid point. That's great and fine. What about maybe focusing on, I mentioned a couple episodes ago about focusing on kids' tablets, essentially kids' education, having that available for children because they're the easiest to adopt new things, right? That's another option. A big corporation, I know Dell at one point installed Ubuntu on their desktops and their laptops. You could get that. What do you think? Maybe a company like System76 growing their market share with a specific way. I don't know. What do you think? Why don't you put that in the comments and let's have a discussion about this and let's see. I'm excited about what the Linux desktop offers, but if I'm real with myself, my wife and my close circle, they're probably not going to care one way or the other, but we do. We care about open source. We care about customization. We care about freedom. We care about choice. All of those things are important to us, and that's why we typically moved to Linux. Or we love the piece of hardware and we want to keep it going. Right. Anyways, thanks for joining me today. See you next time.